Good morning, my beautiful children. Today we are going to read the next chapter in Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. Yesterday we read a chapter called The Maze, and in that chapter we learned that there are peculiar things happening to the rats in the science lab. We learned that they are timing the rats and seeing how fast they can get through a maze and shocking them if they're not fast enough or if they're going the wrong direction. So they're really trying to see how smart these rats can be. So today we're going to read a lesson in reading. Oh, one other thing I forgot to tell you. Do you remember one of the rats escaped to get a look around the lab to see what it was like? And his name was Jenner. Of course, they captured him and put him back into his cage, but he started a conversation with Nicodemus. I wonder what they are up to. So, a lesson in reading. Of course, Justin did not escape that day, nor even that year. When they, Julie, put on a glove and went to pick him up, he submitted meekly enough, and in a short time he was back in his cage. Yet he had learned some new things. He had, as Julie had noticed, examined the air ducts, the openings along the wall through which warm air flowed in the winter and cool air in the summer, and he had studied the windows. Mainly, he had learned that he could, occasionally at least, jump from his cage and wander around without incurring any anger or injury. All of this eventually was very important, for it was Justin, along with Jenner, who finally figured out how to get away. It had part I had a part in it too, but all that came later. I won't go into details now about the rest of our training except for one part of it that was the most useful of all the training. But in general, during the months that followed, two things were happening. First, we were learning more than any rats ever had before, and we were becoming more intelligent than any rats had ever been before. Second, the second thing was we could not consider, for some point of view, even more important and certainly more astonishing than the first, that Dr. Schultz, you will recall, had said that the new series of injections might increase our lifespan by double or more. Yet even he was not prepared for what happened. Perhaps it was the odd combination of both types of injections working together. I don't really know, and neither did he. But the result was that, as far as he could detect, in the group A, the aging process seemed to absolutely stop. For example, during the years we were in the laboratory, most of the rats in the control group grew old and sickly, and they finally died. So did those in B group, for though they were getting injections too, the formula was not quite the same as what we were getting. But among the 20 of us in A group, no one could see any signs that we were growing older at all. Apparently, though we seldom saw them, the same thing was happening with the G group, the mice who were getting the same injections as we were. Now Dr. Schultz was greatly excited about this. The short lifespan has always been a prime limiting factor in education, he told George and Julie. If only we could double it and speed up the learning process at the same time. Why, the possibilities are enormous. Double it. Even now, years later, years after the injections were stopped, we seem scarcely any older than we were when we were in the lab. We could not detect either of these things ourselves. That is, we did not feel any different, and since we had no contact with other groups, we had no basis of comparison. All we had to go by was what Dr. Schultz said. He and the others were preparing a research paper about us he published in some scientific journal. So each morning he dictated the results of the previous day's test into a tape recorder. We heard all of it, though there was a lot of technical stuff we couldn't understand, especially at first, until the paper was published. He kept reminding George and Julie of this. The whole experiment was to be kept completely and totally secret. The one important phase of training began one day after weeks of really hard work at the shape recognition maze that I mentioned before. But this was different. For the first time, they used sounds along with the shapes, and pictures, real pictures that we could recognize. For example, one of the first and simplest of these exercises was a picture, a clear photograph of a rat. I suppose they felt sure that we would know what that was. This picture was shown on a screen with a light behind it. Then, after I looked at that picture and recognized it, a shape flashed in the screen under it, a sort of a half circle and two straight lines, not like anything that I'd ever seen before, and then the voice came on. R, R, R. It was Julie's voice, speaking very clearly, but it had a tiny sound. It was a record. After repeating R a dozen times or so, the picture shape disappeared and another came to the screen, still under the picture of the rat. It was a triangle with legs on it, and Julie's voice began, A, A, A. And when the shape disappeared, a third one came to the screen. This one was a cross. Julie's voice said, T, T, T. Then all of the shapes appeared all at once, and the record said, A, T, R. You will already have recognized what was going on. They were teaching us to read. The symbols under the picture were the letters R, A, T. But the idea did not become clear to me, nor to any of us for quite some time, because of course we didn't know what we were reading. We didn't know what reading was at all. Oh, and we learned to recognize the shapes easily enough. And when I saw the rat picture, I knew straight away what symbol would appear beneath it. And in the same way, when the picture showed a car, I knew the same shape would appear, except for the first one would be a half circle, and Julie's voice would repeat, C, C, C. I even learned that when the photograph showed not one but several rats, a fourth shape would appear, under it a snaky line, and the sound with that one was S, S, S. But as to what all of that was for, none of us had one inkling. It was Jenner who finally figured it out, and by the time we had developed a sort of system of communication, a simple enough thing, just passing spoken messages from one cage to the next, like passing notes at school, you might say, Justin, who was still next to me, called to me one day. Message for Nicodemus from Jenner. It's important, he says. All right, I said. What's the message? Look at the shapes on the wall next to the door. He said, look carefully. My cage, like Jenner's and those of the rest of the group, was close enough to the door so I could see what he meant. And near the doorway there was a large square piece of white cardboard fastened to the wall. It was a sign. It was covered with an enormous black markings to which I'd never paid much attention, though they had been there ever since we had arrived. And now, for the very first time, I looked at them carefully, and I grasped what Jenner was saying. He had discovered the top lines of the black marks on the wall were instantly familiar. R-A-T-S, rats. As soon as I saw them, I thought of the picture that went with them, and as soon as I did that, I was, for the first time, reading. Because, of course, that's what reading is, using symbols to suggest a picture or an idea. From that time on, it gradually became clear for me what all the lessons were for, and once I understood the idea, I was eager to learn more. I could scarcely wait for the very next lesson. The whole concept of reading was, for me at least, fascinating. I remember how proud I was when, months later, I was able to read and understand the whole sign. I read it hundreds of times, and I'll never forget it. Rats may not be removed from the laboratory without written permission. And at the bottom, smaller letters, the word NIM. But then a puzzling thing came up, a thing we're still not sure about even now. Apparently, Dr. Schultz, who was running the lessons, did not realize how well they were succeeding. He continued the training with new words and new pictures every day. But the fact is, once we had grasped the idea and learned the different sounds that each letter stood for, we leaped way ahead of him. And I remember well, during one of the lessons, looking at a picture of a tree, and under the letters flashed on TREE, but the picture, Though the tree was in the foreground, there was a building in the background and a sign near it. I scarcely glanced at the tree, but concentrated instead on reading the sign. It said, NIM, private parking by permit only, reserved for doctors and staff, no visitor parking. The building behind it, tall and white, looked very much like the building that we were in. I'm quite sure that Dr. Schultz had plans for testing our reading ability. I could even guess from the words that he was teaching us what the tests were going to be like. For example, he taught us left and right, door, food, open, and so on and so on. It was not hard to imagine the rest. I would be placed in one chamber, my food in another. There would be 2 doors and a sign saying, for food, open, door at right, or something like that. And then, if all of us moved unerringly toward the proper door, he would know that we understood the sign. As I had said, I'm not sure that he planned to do this, but apparently he did not think that we were ready for it yet. I think maybe he was even a little afraid to try it because if he did it too soon, or if for any reason it did not work, his experiment would fail. He wanted to be sure that his caution was his he wanted to be sure, but that caution of his was his undoing. Justin announced one evening around the partition, I'm going to get out of my cage tonight and wander around a bit. How can you? It's locked. Yes, but did you notice along the bottom edge there's a printed strip? I had noticed it. I should perhaps explain that when Dr. Schultz and the others opened our cages, we could never quite see how they did it. They manipulated something under the plastic floor, something we could see, that we couldn't see. What did it say? Well, I've been trying to read it for the last 3 times that they brought me back to my cage. It was very small in print, but I think that I finally have made it out. To release the door, pull the knob, and slide right. Knob? Under the floor, there's an inch black. There's a metal thing, just in front of the shelf. I think that's the knob, and I think I can reach it through with a wire. Anyway, I'm going to try. Now you're going to try? Not until they close up. Closing up? That was a ritual that Dr. Schultz and Julie went through each night. For about an hour, they sat at their desks, wrote their notes in books, filed papers in cabinets, and finally locked the cabinets. And then they checked all the cages, dimmed the lights, locked the doors, and went home, leaving us alone in the still laboratory. About a half an hour after they had left that night, Justin said, I'm going to try now. I heard a scuffling noise, a click and a scrape of metal, and in a matter of seconds I saw his door swing wide open. It was as simple as that. When you could read. Wait, I said. What's the matter? If you jump down, you won't be able to get back in. Then they're going to know. I've thought about that. I'm not going to jump down. I'm going to climb up the outside of the cage. It's easy. I've been climbing up the inside thousands of times. Above these cages there's another shelf, and it's empty. I'm going to walk along there and see what I can see. I think there's a way to climb to the floor and then get back up again. Why don't you go with me? The door would open the same way. Well, I better not this time. Don't you think if something goes wrong and I can't get back, they'll say, it's just A9 again. But if the 2 of us are found outside, they'll take it seriously. They might put new locks on our cages. He was right. And you can see that already we both had the same idea in mind, that this might be the first step towards the escape of all. And that is the end of learning to read. Tomorrow we're going to read a chapter called Air Ducts. So now that the author has shared a little bit with what the rats had been up to, that they were starting to get smarter, and they didn't age. They seemed to have twice as long of a lifespan, and now they were learning to read. And Justin got out of his cage and was able to go up and kind of look around. What do you think tomorrow is going to be is called the air ducts. What do you think that chapter might be about? Write me a quick 2 or 3 sentences about what you think the rats are going to do with air ducts and what you think might happen next. In any event, have a wonderful day, my sweet children, and I will talk with you soon.